Ernix asked me to come and speak to you, and they've asked to put a presentation together about what will impact the future and what will define tomorrow. But before we can do that, and I think there's a lot of pricing practitioners in the room today, our job is to analyze data, find signals, and then make a prediction. So I decided to do my talk on my experiences, so going back into the past, things that have sort of shaped me and created my perspective, and then I can give an opinion of what will happen in the future. One thing I can tell you is that I recognize there's way better, smarter people in this room today than me. If you disagree with my opinion, great. But it's great that we don't always agree, because innovation comes from disagreement. If everybody agrees, I think there's a problem. But I want to say thank you to Moses. So I wanted to do a bit of an overview of South Africa and what happens in South Africa. And you've given quite a nice one. So Moses, thank you. You've helped me save a few minutes on my own presentation today. But something I want to mention is, in South Africa, only 30% of vehicles are insured. The other 70% is not insured. So if you get into an accident, you have a very good chance of bumping into somebody that is not insured. So in South Africa, there's a massive opportunity there's an underserved market. And I think when we look at insurance practitioners, I believe we have an opportunity to do something for good. Because there's 70% of people in the country who have a vehicle that if something bad happens, they won't be able to claim back or restore themselves into a financial position. So, but anyways, going back, my journey up to now has taught me a few things. It doesn't mean that's the only things that I've ever learned in my life. 5 things. I've learned more than 5 things. But there's a bit of a technical side and a non-technical side. And we'll walk through this. And at the end of all of this, 5 points, I will then sort of say, well, what do I think will happen in the future? So, if we go with the first one, first principles thinking, so it is just a way of thinking. Now, we've heard a lot of things about AI, predictive AI, Gen AI, agentic AI, all of these different things. If we are just going to be the individuals that's going to use the tools without understanding what you're doing, there's a big danger that we will face. So I remember when GLMs became a thing, and a lot of people were saying, how are you going to explain it? Today we know that GLMs are quite easy to explain. Then you get into GBMs, you might get into some of these large language models that will give us answers. My concern is that if we aren't going to apply this, when you try to apply these models, how will we actually be able to explain the outcome of it itself? So this picture over here, this is a real-life picture with my team. So we started the process of ripping out our rating engine and replacing Ernix as the new rating engine. But this is where we started, with first principles. It's a basic thing where you try to break down a very difficult problem into its bare bones, and then you start drawing on a board, and you say, oh, this is where this piece goes, this is where that piece goes, and you start building the problem from the foundational build up. And I think it also entices to ask a simple question of why. So why have we been doing things this way? I think innovation, you need to be able to challenge status quo. And to challenge status quo, you need to be able to ask this very, very simple question of why. So in my view, when you do all of this, you start asking the question of why, you start creating value beyond predictions. So you can apply first principle thinking in terms of the models that you use, but it's also in terms of the problems that you have to solve as a practitioner in pricing itself. So I can sort of just simplifies first principle thinking. In a world of complexity, increasing complex models and powerful pricing platforms, first principle thinking is my reminder that pricing tools are only as good as the user of that pricing tool or any other model that might come. The next teaching, or the next principle, the value of data. So today as well, we heard a lot of things about data. So there's a lot of them. We have millions and millions of rows of data, columns of data. And it becomes it's our rawest form of material that we use to make decisions, to do insights and analytics. But the reality is, for me, is that you need to start looking for causation and not just correlation. So we're now talking about all of these newer techniques where we've used a lot of proxies. So in my own career, the first time I ever saw telematics data, I was fortunate enough to be part of a business that invested in telematics and actually built their business around telematics. Now, as a pricing actuary, at that point in time, I was like, yes, now I can know where you drive, how fast you drive, what were you doing on Saturday night between 11 and Sunday morning at 2. But the reality is that people way cleverer than me saw the value and the potential of this data. They could build a product around it. They can try to change behavior to get people to be better drivers and reduce accidents. Now, I feel if we start approaching data in that manner, not just as a predictive tool to understand risk, but how we can change risk and to sort of guide our customer experiences. So you might see today something that tells us, driving between 11 and 2 on a Friday afternoon is a bad time to drive. Let your customer know. And then maybe ask a different question. Why is it a bad time to drive? And then we can maybe potentially even avoid or do some risk mitigation for customers to help them through that process. So for me, the true value of data becomes when you give it direction. And if you then go back to first principles and you apply it in pricing or product development, it is a window into our customer. So the customer is actually giving us something that is quite precious, and we have a responsibility to use that responsibly. It allows us to do more than just price risk. It helps us to create an opportunity to reduce it and then create experiences around it for our customers. So moving off the technical stuff and a bit more on the fluffier stuff, which is not typically the case for us who are analytically inclined, is that sharing knowledge. So I'm very thankful for my own mentors. So I can say that I've been practicing insurance pricing and product development for a long time, but I managed to learn from someone that took their time to sit down with me and trust me with the knowledge that I imparted. I think that's an important part of it, and I think saying thank you, and I think even like in sessions like these, we've had a lot of people that were willing to come stand in front of us and share their experiences and let us teach us something. And then the other thing is, when you share knowledge, you need to be quite open to admit that you're not always right. You're more often wrong than right. So admitting that you don't know everything helps us to create more opportunities. So being in a room with your team, sitting down and saying, look guys, in the past I did this way, but how would you approach this problem? And then also sometimes it's just fine saying, well, I don't know what the answer is. And in doing that and becoming a bit more of not the manager, but a mentor in this process, you start building stronger teams and individuals so that you can leave them. So it's like my number one objective in life is that I want a team that's so good that I can just chill. I can just sit in my room and I can do all the work and delegate away. That's where you really achieve the good thing of being a leader, that you have a team that can do these types of things. And then finally, I think the other thing is if you're prepared to teach, it is also a way of how you clarify your own thinking. I think a typical behavioral issue is over time you get to say, I'm always right. You introduce a bias in yourself that you say, I've done it this way, that's why it works. But when you start teaching someone else, you can start asking yourself that, is there a bit of bias in the way I think and how I do things that I can maybe potentially change? But coming to this point, what I've learned is, in this world that we are living in, it's fast changing. No one can always have all the answers. And sharing what you know and creating the space for others to share what they know, we can build a community that is stronger, smarter, and more adaptable than any individual. Along the way, and I can, for me personally as well, is that you get to experience one of leadership's greatest privileges, helping someone else to achieve the best version of themselves. Okay, and then jumping into the next one, the power of connecting with others. So I've now sort of gone through, like, you know, be the person that shares your information and help. The difference between sharing and and connecting with others is that when I joined Momentum Insure in 2023, we had to do some radical pricing changes. And in that process, what I've seen is that the pricing and product development team, it doesn't work in isolation. And it's sometimes seen by that. So if you take it from a sales or service perspective, it's a bunch of people that sit in the background and calculate prices, and then when they don't like us, they put up prices by 30 or 40%, and we're doing all of these things to hurt them. But realizing that you don't work in a vacuum and you start to collaborate, you start creating new perspectives. You start hearing what is happening from the front end. It's maybe sitting with a broker and understanding their challenges on a day-to-day basis of how to sell policies, when to sell policies. The servicing, what was quite nice, and I think definitely something that we will explore, is this ability with helping our servicing agents and brokers to explain increases, an example, with the use of AI. Now, I think all of these different types of things is that how you calibrate these models and how you train these models. I don't think it's just going to be about the price of risk and retail pricing of what to charge in the market. There's going to be an element of positioning that will come with it. And I think that's where it will become important that you can connect with people from different backgrounds. And hopefully through that process of collaboration, you can do one that creates trust, so that when you sit down, you can have honest feedback that can help you then build a better outcome. So basically, the real breakthroughs, and what I've experienced, is that when you start to listen to unexpected voices, don't always think you have the right answer. Listen, and listen with authentically to your partners in the business. And that's where you typically see some good outcomes. But anyways, to summarize, when we connect with others, we get there to get their perspective. And when we do that authentically, we can gain context that we would have not on our own. And that context can mean the difference between a good decision and a great one. And then finally, purpose. So maybe just by a show of hands, who knows what is a braai? Okay, so a braai is a barbecue. It's where you put some fire, and then you put the meat on the fire, and then everybody stands around the fire and have a drink. Now, a lot of my friends don't work in insurance. And then they ask me, so what do you do for a day job? And I said, well, I price insurance products, and I develop insurance products. And they look at me funny, because I might say it with a bit more passion than I should around the braai. And then I'm like saying, and people will ask, like, why does this make you tick? And I think for me, it's more than just the numbers. So if our purpose at Momentum is that we help our clients feel safe by protecting what matters most to them. Now, as a pricing practitioner and as a product development practitioner, you're sitting there, you're not at the front, you're not like getting to see the customer, but your calculations, your product that you're developing is impacting an individual, a business, or a family. So that if something does happen, so I go back to sort of saying that only 30% in South Africa is insured currently with their vehicle. We need to get to 100%. And how to do that is a tough one. It's a big challenge to have. And I think that is the motivation that I get to do what I do, is that behind these numbers, there are real families, real businesses. We've seen today, we talk about AI. You know, not saying AI is a bad thing, but we need to understand at the end of the day, the customer that we serve is a real person. The customer is not going to get replaced by AI. So when we get to that point, we need to make sure that it serves it in the best way. And then finally, to find your passion. So like, I really want to explore all of these things, but then try to use it for good. So it's about really serving the customer in a way that we've never served that customer before, and that's the opportunity. But anyways, to summarize this one, knowing what my work can help someone recover from a loss, protect their livelihood, or just give them the peace of mind is what keeps me motivated and curious to committed to doing this better every single day. Then with 9 minutes left, I don't know if you know these two characters. They are Doc and Marty. And if you can remember, in 1989, Back to the Future 2 came out. And what was quite interesting is that at that point in time, they made some predictions about the future. Some of them became true, some of them not so true. So when Ernix asked me, what do I think will impact us in the future? It's like Back to the Future here now. They got things right. Video calls, biometrics to do payments, motion-controlled gaming. But these people in 1989 also believed that every house will have 10 fax machines. I think there's some people in this room today that don't even know what a fax machine is. But some other predictions is weather control. How cool would that be? They got it wrong, but we complain about climate change, but wouldn't it be cool if we can start controlling the weather? So again, some of these things will impact it. But if I look at the South African market, the future is economic times are tough. Customers are cash-strapped. I go back to sort of say, we talk about 30%, but the reality is, in South Africa, a big portion of the nation needs to decide between sending your kid to school, eating, or buying insurance. So a critical part of the future that will impact is, as insurance carriers, we need to find ways to reduce the cost of insurance and still produce a good quality product that can serve the need of the customer. I think the other thing in the South African market is that we've been hit by a few things. So load shedding, I don't know, a lot of people will know what load shedding is, but there was a point in time when our electricity provider had to switch off power in the country because there was not enough to go around. But what I saw, and what we saw in the country, was that a lot of South Africans then decided to go solar. And in the last 3 or 4 years, private entities in South Africa generate around about 9 gigawatts of power. Now, if I look in the future again, I believe in the community of South Africans that that's where the solution will be found. So that when adversity hits, South Africa managed to come together and find a way forward. And it takes me back to the knowledge sharing, is that when you're like faced with certain things that, you know, reinsurers don't want to touch the risk anymore, etc. I believe as industry we would have to come together and find a way how we can still protect the assets of the normal South African. If I look at data, AI, and all of the different things we talked about, predictive AI, these are enablers. I don't know in 10 years if everybody's going to have a flying car or not, but I know I'm going to have the tools, which is shown there, to help us proactively manage the risk. So it's being able to keep your pulse on the trend and then see how things play out. I think climate change is going to be a thing, and of how we're going to deal with it, if it's going to become community-rated type of perils and all of those different types of things in the country, I'm not sure. but we need to be able to have all the right tools in place to do so. Then, from a risk evaluation perspective, so during the day we've sort of heard about how risks impact places like Brazil, and weirdly enough, the problems are very similar that you get faced with. Now, in South Africa, we haven't seen a big EV trend coming in yet. But what is nice is that we can start learning from our global friends and partners what this will be in the future. And then also, when we start seeing that risk evolution, just not by saying, well, okay, price it by this way, but how can we start to mitigate that risks will be important. And then I think about in the Internet of Things, enable insights. So I mentioned telematics. I wonder when it's going to become that time when we're going to chip people, you know? So like I know now, I don't just know where you drive, but I know how you feel. And then the moral hazard that will come with that as well. Because we're already talking about AI. You know, AI can go onto your social media and read everything that you want to get to know of that person. I don't have to chip you. I just need to get your data. And then I think that's a responsibility that we need to have in place, that we use the Internet of Things in a professional and a responsible manner down the line. And then finally, customer behavior. So I saw Efficient Frontier today. I saw a lot about risk rating, price elasticity, but it's shifting, creating demand. So I think the time is ripe for insurance to start rethinking about the rules that we operate on and how we sort of engage in those ways that we can start building more smarter and more affordable products. It's not about adding the bells and whistles, at least not in South Africa at this point in time. And then also channel affinity. So we are sort of starting to see within the country, predominantly it's still direct call center, face-to-face type of business, but the insurtechs are coming, and then I think you need to be able to deal with your customer in the way that they want to be dealt with. If I take my two daughters, they don't know what a telephone is. They don't speak over phones anymore. They do video calls. They do text messages. And if I think about this, is something not too long ago said as well, is that the next generation of insurable risks and insurable assets will be quite different because how and our kids and their kids will start to engage in that itself. But to conclude, I believe within the South African context, simplicity and low-cost operations is going to be key to success. Any insurer that can balance easier to understand products and competitive pricing will gain a substantial advantage. So for me, with all the tools that we have, the focus should therefore be on the mechanisms to make that happen. Good quality cover at a good quality, affordable price. Not cheap, affordable. And that's what's going to win the game at the end of the day. And that's it. Thank you.